And we were doing already that. And I remember telling my students, we are in the energy transition. And it never happened. And we lost so many good brains to the States, to Europe. I was feeling disheartened. It was very horrible. So then another thing that I found myself telling my students was that when I begin, I start telling them how robust, how exigent, how the best in the planet environmental protection legislation we had in Canada. And then years pass, and I found telling my students, your main objective is to protect the safety and the health of Canadians because you are going to swear at the day of your ceremony, you become an engineer, you're going to swear that you have to protect public safety and security. Forget about environmental legislation. Because the very nice environmental legislation that we had in the 70s, it just was ripped out. It was made a big holes because they took parts and parts and parts. There was a funny rule in the government that said for every new bill that you want to bring, you have to take out 3. And there is no logic to that, it's just politics. And so it was horrible. And the environmental impact assessment was only modernized in C69, like 4 years ago, after, again, 20 years of having this legislation. So I know when I talk about that renewable energy is becoming the cleanest, the safest, the cheapest, but not only that, it makes us free, independent of energy from geopolitics. I'm sure you know all the geopolitics that surround when we are talking about coal, gas, and oil. There's a lot of geopolitics. And sometimes I find that we don't see the difference between developing an energy project as economic lever or developing an energy project because there is demand, okay? Take, for example, Site C. The Northwest Territory government gave me a 2-year contract to tell them if the Site C was a good investment and if it was going to have positive or negative impact to the Northwest Territory, putting emphasis on the Mackenzie watershed. And I don't know if you're aware, but the Mackenzie watershed controls the climate of half Canada. So whatever we do to the Mackenzie watershed, we're doing it to half of Canada. So at the end of this research project, I concluded that it was going to cause a lot of frictions with the First Nations. It was not even a good economical investment, and it was not for energy demand. It was to be an economic lever, which is still under construction. The same thing with Baie du Nord. So we know that there is a current energy landscape, and we know, as David said, renewables are growing. As I mentioned too, they are in free fall with cheapest, becoming very, very cheap. China is the power on solar panels. The States, and if you go to Texas, it's the contradiction, but they are the ones that are developing the most solar and wind energy in the United States. US IRA is a game changer. If you haven't seen that, you have to reflect 2-3 times. It's turbocharging the energy space in Canada. When I talked this morning that I've been in conversation with multilateral banks, I have heard this information. Some people says that if Canada doesn't gear up their game on renewable energy, we are going to have between 1,000 and 3,000 companies, Canadian, that won't be able to present projects to the trickling down economy that will be generated by IRA. So this is very important. I've been in missions, commercial missions, from Canada to South America and to Asia, and I've been in economic missions from businessmen around all the world coming to Quebec province, okay? And when we do these commercial missions, the government prepares, every government, Canada or Quebec, prepares documents showing all the potential that we have. The potential that we have for critical minerals, for example. So when investors from around the world come, they have these documents that shows where are the places for critical minerals or for other minerals. But interestingly, we don't have this information for the potential of renewables in Canada. How this is possible? I was recently in a mission to Europe, and we were in Spain and then later to Portugal, and they have books this thick with all the potential. Everything is quantified, even including how much return for every dollar that you are going to invest. We don't have this in Canada. So we have investors, and it's true, early it was mentioned that Canadian investors are afraid of risk. Yes, this is true. The pension plans in Canada has billions or trillions of money, and they are very risk adverse, and they are still looking into the same type of investment, which is sad. But wherever they go, they are provided with good information, and we need engineers, we need to help our local government, our provincial government in developing this type of information, so when investors come, we can tell them where are the zones for solar, for wind, for critical minerals, including for nuclear elements too. I want to talk about this story about reporting emissions. Earlier I mentioned that we underestimate our emissions coming from the oil and gas and coal from Canada. And I said one of the reasons is because, you know, the methodology, they are still working on the methodology, even though there is a standard methodology brought by the IPCC. And we are underestimating, and I also said that in the top of that, we have the issue now with the wildfires that is going to increase the greenhouse gas emissions. But I want to warn you about greenwashing, because we hear and we listen a lot of corporations saying, I'm going to reach net zero 2050. But then when you go into the details and you want to see how much or when or how fast, then the details are not there. And I know it is very technical to talk in terms of a scope 1, a scope 2, and a scope 3. But what people are really saying is, I'll get to net zero 2050 only with a scope 1. And they are not telling you that a scope 2 and a scope 3 are not there. And that's why it is possible to get to 2050 with the scope 1 only. So what are the challenges? Of course, we have challenges. We have geographical challenges. But at the same time, if we look into renewable energy as a local, and that we don't define how, but the goal, then locally, each province, each region will be able to choose what is available to them. Is it wind? If it's solar? I mentioned this morning, Quebec choose biomass. We have 2 mega biodigesters that take care of all our organic matter. We in Canada over-rely on fossil fuels. I know this is historical, this is difficult. It's our business as usual, and it is very difficult to escape from that mentality. But I remember being one time in Alberta and following a car. And I was following a car because I was trying to read the plate. And in the plate, and then I realized that it was not just one, but many. And it had something that goes like this: God, please give me another boom, and I will swear that I will take care of the bust. And this boom and bust economy is not good for nobody. And we have to diversify our economy. And so we have this over-reliance on fossil fuels. And of course, policy and regulatory barriers, for sure. Until very recently, we had 2 provinces that had banned wind and tidal offshore energy. They have banned. Why is that? Why is that they have banned offshore energy? There is no logic reason. This is politics. There is another anecdote that I want to talk about. So when Baie du Nord was approved in Newfoundland, it was approved very fast. And we had natural resources coming to the National Finance Committee. So I asked this question: is Baie du Nord an energy demand answer? It's a problem of energy demand, or is it an economic lever? There is no answer. Okay, I have 3 minutes. So the second question is, okay, the government is putting a big amount of our taxpayer money in this Baie du Nord project promoted by Equinor. Why are we not putting the same amount of money to finish the Muskrat Fall hydroelectric project? Is it the same provinces? Both of them are in Newfoundland. And the answer of the official was, sorry, Senator, I haven't heard about Muskrat Fall hydroelectric project. I wrote a letter because I couldn't stand that somebody from natural resources will tell me that they didn't know about Muskrat Falls. But that's the reason it is important to ask the why. When we do environmental impact assessment, the first question is why? Why we want to do this? Is this for economical reasons? Is this for economical lever? Is this because we need more energy? So these questions are very important. Cost and competitiveness. Okay, yes, this is very important. I think that we have get to this point with a lot of pressure on competition. We have even put provinces against each other in competition. And that's why we do more business from Canada with the South than between our own provinces. More. I can tell you in a specific situation which I was pulling my hair because Hydro-Quebec wanted to have a big contract to send hydroelectricity to New England states. And they were about to sign, and that contract fall down because the pension plans in Ontario, which were investors of that, decided not to support the project. So, are we Canadians or, I don't know, but I know that there are barriers like banning, banning offshore or banning solar and wind. This is not good. And we have to go and repair each one of these barriers. Infrastructure limitation, again, because we rely a lot on the fossil fuel industry and that we have always the same type of infrastructure. And of course, we have invested in this infrastructure, like we have invested now in a pipeline. And so we want to have our money back, even though the price of the pipeline is logarithmically going very high. Again, why did we buy this pipeline? Is it economical reason? It was political reason? Why we bought this pipeline? Public perception and awareness. I told you, polls are telling us more and more that Canadians are saying we are not doing enough to fight climate change. I mentioned this report, we just finished, it just came out. Is hydrogen a viable option for a net zero Canada in 2050? And we go into details. And we revise those numbers that I was telling you this morning about two departments giving different numbers. So I invite you to read our report. And that's it for me. Thank you so much.
Well, just while the slides are coming up, I'll introduce myself. I'm Brad Buckham. I'm the Chair of Mechanical Engineering at the University of Victoria. And I'm going to talk to you today about wave energy. And I'll let the introduction of the group I work with, we'll get into the next couple slides. But to start out, I think, Senator Galvez, you talked about tidal energy today and this morning. Guri gave me the heads up that it was mentioned. I think most people could probably visualize a tidal energy converter. Just to know my audience, who can visualize what a wave energy converter looks like? Guri's out. Okay. The UVic crew is out. I know that they've seen this before. Okay, so that gives me an idea. A couple things Senator Galvez mentioned that I'll try and pick up on. Understanding our renewables potential. We talked about the growth renewables. I've heard tidal mentioned, wind mentioned, solar mentioned. I think David mentioned 6 to 7% of what we need. We're getting from those sources. And like I mentioned, I'll be talking about wave today. I'm a researcher in the Institute for Integrated Energy Systems, or ISFIC, and I'll talk to you about work that's going on at a group called Primed that I co-direct, which is inside ISFIC. So what's Primed? Some investment from Pacific Economic Development Canada came into the Institute. We took some tools and methods that were buried in some academic labs, grad student research, and brought them up into this entity called Primed. And the idea there is to be able to work with communities up and down the BC coast. These are small communities reliant on largely on diesel for generation, and to look at doing the front-end engineering work to help them plan marine energy projects. Senator Galvez also mentioned the idea of the discussion of 2050 and net zero, and I think you said, where are the details? And Primed, being at UVic, I don't know if the UVic contingent already bragged about ASET. We did that today, so I don't have to explain ASET. Although I learned yesterday that the acronym was actually designed to be ASET, which makes a lot of sense, but we all say ASET. So the premise of ASET is that the details are in community-led projects. So if we can look at really innovative technologies and take a lot of small incremental steps, that's hard work. But we can see how how technologies engage. We can engage people. We can unify populations behind these community-sponsored projects and make progress that complements maybe some of the larger centralized renewable energy projects in the country. Starting point for the communities we deal with, every yellow dot is a diesel-dependent community in Canada. And yes, BC is a hydroelectric superpower, but you can see the cluster of communities on the BC coast. Most of those communities are coastal or in a coastal domain, and the majority of them happen to be indigenous, and we could talk about 200 years of dark history as to why our electricity infrastructure didn't gravitate towards those communities on the coast, but that's the state of affairs today with our grid. So for wave energy, I'm going to talk about possibilities and practicalities. So possibilities are states of being that may or may not be true, and practicalities are things that we can work with and execute within the limits of the tools at hand. And when you talk about energy transitions, unfortunately, we can't chase every possibility. I think it's scary to say, but we don't have time to do that. And we definitely can't work within what's practical today, because that hasn't gotten us where we need to go, and Senator Galvez touched on that. So academically, when we look at wave energy, it's on that spectrum of practical to what's possible. Look into the future with the engineering tools we have and see if we can find those practicalities around wave energy. What is possible? What could we use? This is a statement from the OES. It's functionally useless. Basically says there's more wave power in the ocean than there is demand for energy in the world. That's great, but you can't do much with that if you're a community. If you dig in farther, these are the marine energy resources globally. These are compiled from old estimates by the IEA, so you can see wave is the yellow there at 29.5 terawatt hours a year. You can see ocean thermal. And tidal was mentioned this morning. I couldn't be here, but that's the little gray sliver. So wave is in yellow, tidal is in gray. And when we say marine energy, I guarantee 99% of you, I might have been the only one who thought wave first. So nobody would, if we were going into renewables exercise, ignore the predominant renewable resource that you have at hand when you're looking at this portfolio you're trying to build. The one thing I missed there, in terms of developed potential in the world, there's 2 megawatts of installed capacity of wave. There's about 4 megawatts of tidal, and there's about another 4 megawatts that were planned in 2022 for each category of technology. So immense possibility, practically, we're not using very much. And the rest of the talk is really about what's going on in BC. So admittedly, I'll be a bit myopic looking provincially, and in fact, I'll be more myopic. I'll really look at Vancouver Island, but I just wanted to give you a feel for work that's going on in some of the other renewables that we're trying to bring to the forefront. So with waves, it's all about spectrum. So I'm talking to engineers, so I can talk about a spectrum. This is something I usually show to high school students, and I spend 10 minutes on this slide. We need to know how the wave energy is distributed across the directions that they're propagating, and then the frequencies of the waves. And if we can get that detail, then we can design machines that work with that sea surface. Okay, so we do that at UVic and primed with a lot of coastal engineering, and I know that Kevin mentioned he's a coastal engineer, so I think this is close to his heart. So this is the sixth or seventh, I can't remember, sixth generation of a coastal wave model we run in collaboration with the National Research Council. You're looking at the outer boundary there, that ellipse. We take wave conditions that are provided to us by some partners down at Oregon State University, and then numerically you can propagate those wave conditions with knowledge of the winds, which we get from Environment Canada, and you can figure out what the wave climate is doing all the way up to shore. So everywhere you see a color there, that's a wave energy potential. We measure wave energy in watts per meter or kilowatts per meter. If you think of a wave crest coming at you, if you put up a screen door that was a meter wide, what's the energy flux through that portal? And you can see that right up to shore, we're around 30 to 35 kilowatts a meter of power. It's about 15 to 20 times. Even on a summer day just offshore of Vancouver Island, the wave energy potential is about 10 to 15 times greater than the solar potential on the same surface of water. So again, this is a massive resource, and the job is to try and figure out how to implement it. This is just a snapshot of the Marine Energy Atlas of Canada. So this is a new wave model. You can go to this online. It's publicly available now as of a few months ago, and you get all kinds of statistics on wave energy. So not a lot of people know this exists. I mean, wave energy is kind of coming out of its shell, I guess, so to speak, and arriving on the scene internationally. We all know of blue economy strategies. Canada's releasing a coastal marine strategy, or the Canadian Marine Strategy, quite soon, and wave energy plays a large role in all of those. Some other work that goes on here, UVic works closely with Axis Technologies, another company, Marine Labs. So we've got equipment that's deployed right now all up and down the coast of Vancouver Island, Haida Gwaii, measuring wave energy and tidal energy potential that's occurring. These measurements are really important because internationally there are rules now when you want to start a marine energy project. We actually have some rules in place on the resource assessment that needs to take place ahead of deploying a marine energy converter and launching that project. And so we've been trying to put all of that data in the bank, so to speak, ahead of some of these community projects starting up. So, and what you're looking at there with that graph, that buoy that you're looking at, that one has an MMSI, mobile marine something identifier. It's Beverly. It's named after my mother. And it's been on Amphitrite Bank since 1997. And you're seeing a snapshot. That's just a chart. It's a histogram of wave heights and periods. So every time we get a measurement with a height and a period, a pair of values, it just goes into a bin, and we're counting bins, and we've been doing that now for a number of years. Okay, so what's practical? So we're doing all these measurements, what do we do with it? Well, once we have a rich data set, we can actually do some neat MCDA or some GIS work trying to locate strategic sites in Vancouver Island. And what we've been doing is looking to see, again, in terms of practicalities, like what space could we use? And so we take perspectives where we try and say, well, if we prioritize avoiding existing economic activity, so avoid fishing zones or avoid areas of intense marine traffic, or maybe we're the standard wave energy project developer and we say, go where the resource is good and all other considerations be damned. We'll just leave them to the side. We take these competing perspectives, bring them together, and what we look for are the sites that are good in everybody's eyes. So we're looking for the sites that are in the top 10% of what's good from everybody's perspective, and you start to see the hashed-in areas that are there. And the idea was to show that compromise is good. And compromise means that you need to be in a certain area. Like if we have constraints on wave energy, the worst thing for wave energy is to say it's site unconstrained. You saw the 29,500 terawatt hours a year. If you're site unconstrained, that means you're the one that can always move if somebody else needs the location. And that's not good for the development of an industry. So up and down Vancouver Island, we've identified a few geographic zones. And if you read those columns of bold numbers from top to bottom, what we're doing is just taking knowledge that we have about how machines work, wave energy converters, and screening out portions of a resource that you can't capture with technology. So this is going from what's possible to what's practical. And even when you bring in the most stringent constraints, we get down to values around 15 kilowatts a meter, which is still about 10 times higher than on a nice summer day, the solar flux that occurs across the surface of the ocean. So still powerful. This one here, all I'm saying is that if you look at 9,000 gigawatt hours of demand on Vancouver Island, that's probably low now. I would guess that we're closer to 10. I think this is around 2014 that we pumped this graph out. If you look at the gross wave energy flux, like what nature delivers off of Vancouver Island in those zones that are strategic, and this is like only 400 square kilometers that you bubble up, that's 29,000 gigawatt hours. If we apply those technical limits, we're down to 12,000 gigawatt hours. So there's lots of room to satisfy Vancouver Island demand, even with technology in the state that it is today. Just two things I want to show you and then I'm done. One is the wave energy project at UQuat. So UQuat is site of first contacts where Captain Cook first came ashore and made contact with indigenous peoples. UQuat was a commercial hub in the late 17 and early 1800s. It was the center of the fur trade in the Pacific Northwest. And then in the late 1800s through about 1968, the Muwachit-Muchelet Nation was forced to relocate from UQuat. And there was one family, the Williams family, that was left living there. The matriarch and patriarch passed away 2020 and 2021. Why am I bringing this up? So the Muwachit-Muchelet Nation, it's a beautiful example of resurgence, has decided that it's extremely important in the nation's perspective to repopulate UQuat. And so they are looking to rebuild the community. And the first thing they need to service the local economy is a sustainable energy supply. And they've chosen to pursue wave energy based on some cultural preferences and the fact that they have a strong resource. So all I'll show here is just work that's ongoing with the nation. So this is led by the Muwachit-Muchelet people. This is just resource assessment that's off McKenna Point. I don't know if anybody's ever boated past McKenna Point. If you talk to a mariner that knows the area, they'll tell you that it's very energetic. And we've looked at installing a few different types of technologies there. Worked with the nation with a South Korean company called Engine. This is a point absorber. And again, maybe this looks like the one that those of you who said you could imagine what a wave energy converter looks like, maybe this was it. And it's actually using the cables. The mooring lines go around pulleys on the seabed and it runs to shore. You're seeing an installation at Jeju Island. And the motion of the buoy that's floating around pulls on those cables, and that drives a power takeoff system on shore. It's a pretty hard one to predict the power of, so we use computer models to do that. All I'm getting at here is if you take resource information, which is on your left, so what are the waves doing at the site, and we take an international standard performance matrix on the right, and you just squeeze those things together, we build annual energy production profiles. And so for this community, we're looking at 700 megawatt hours of production. And if you know your units, you know that 700 megawatt hours means just about nothing in the context of the provincial decarbonization goals. This is like 0.1% of the provincial target for 2030, let alone what we're looking for 2050. But the point here is that it's a leadership example, and that's the premise of the ASEP program at UVic. If we have 10 of those projects demonstrating, as Senator Galvez said, the details of how to integrate this technology into a community grid, that's really powerful, and it sets an international standard. So last thing I'll say is just with ASET, what we're looking at is how those community projects and a sequence of them over time impact energy systems at a broader scale. So on the left, what you're looking at is just a simple line diagram of the Vancouver Island transmission grid. And so we've investigated how 500 megawatts of installed wave energy capacity would impact that grid. And I don't know if you remember the heat dome, now was it 2020 or 2021? 2021, it all blends together. So in the heat dome, our electrical connection of this island to the mainland was threatened. There was 2 lines, I think, where the oil-filled jackets that protect the transmission cables, the heat got so bad that those started to warp. So those cables were at risk. And so you start thinking of resilience, not at the scale of a remote community dependent on diesel, but the entirety of Vancouver Island. And so what are the natural resources? And again, Senator Galvez got at this, solar, wind, what are the tools that we have to work with? Well, if we look at wave, what could it do? And so that study was investigating that 500 megawatts of capacity. And by the way, that's like doubling the generation capacity on Vancouver Island, so that's a big step. But it would eliminate about 15% of the energy that we bring across on those cabled connections. So obviously that's a step, it's not the full step. I think you called it scope 1, Senator Galvez. There's a few scopes behind that would have to kick in. So anyway, the goal today was just to expose you to some of the work that's going on, to put in the back of your mind. If you hear anything about a blue economy, if you hear about new economic levers, new industries occurring out in the ocean, that wave energy is there. It is something that all developed countries in the world that have a coastline are pursuing. And in terms of what's possible and practical, well, we have a world-class resource off of Vancouver Island. And what's available out there exceeds demand, at least for a scope of the island. In terms of practicalities, I think what we're going to see over the next 5 to 10 years are these community-based projects really taking hold. And you can see how some of these communities are the smallest of communities, where in fact the community doesn't exist yet. It's an idea, it's a vision. And I think it's a really exciting time to see how this nascent energy technology can play a role in those types of projects. So anyway, hopefully it's triggered a little bit of imagination as to some of the other renewables that are out there except solar and wind. So good. Thanks, David.
My name's Mark Warren. I don't have any PowerPoint slides today, but I may make some fairly dramatic hand gestures as we go. And I have a confession to make in front of a room of engineers. I'm an engineer myself, and I'm just realizing now that I've raised 2 children. One just graduated from law at UVic, and one is just about to enter law at UVic. So I have to apologize to everybody. I don't know what I did wrong, but anyway, I hopefully it'll be okay. I work for FortisBC in the unceded territory of the Okanagan Nation, or at least theoretically. I don't seem to spend a lot of time there. I have worked for FortisBC for 23 years. I started in the electric company in the interior. You may not be aware there's another electric utility in the province, but we service about 150,000 customers in the south central interior, from Kelowna over to Princeton and as far east as Creston. We're also the largest gas distributor in the province. FortisBC is part of a Canadian company called Fortis Inc., which is based in Newfoundland. It's traded on the Canadian Stock Exchange and the New York Stock Exchange, and we own 10 utilities across North America and the Caribbean. They're mostly electric utilities, and they are, with some exceptions, really us at the moment, really trying to find ways of decarbonizing their electricity supply. Something we kind of forget about a little bit in Canada sometimes is that our electricity supply is quite clean already, and so they're spending a lot of time on that. And in this province, we're coming to an important crossroad, and that crossroad is really looking at the path forward, and here's where the hand gesture comes in. If we look at the coldest day of the year in British Columbia for the last couple of years, they were both in late December, and the temperatures had become quite low, in order of -20, even in the lower mainland and the island. And on those days, slightly more than half of the energy being delivered to houses and businesses in the province came through the gas system. And I mention that because what we're all trying to do is, right now, the big focus is to replace that half of the pie, roughly speaking. It's a little bit bigger than that when you look at it in demand terms, but we're trying to replace, one half of the pie with electricity. That's the primary decarbonization focus right now. And that's one of the things I'm focused on as well. And we're looking at all kinds of different things. And the wave thing, I really just heard about that from Brad a few weeks ago. Very cool. We've been talking to General Fusion. We're looking at all kinds of things. But and it's been mentioned, of course, wind and solar and how cheap they are. But part of the problem with these, and they are going to be important parts of the solution, part of the problem is they're cheap to generate power with, but the issue is getting that power to market, right? And that's where it becomes expensive. And so one of the other problems is the pie is actually getting bigger, and not just by growth. It's because we're also, one of the other things I'm responsible for is our electric vehicle charging program at FortisBC, our public program. And so that pie is actually getting bigger because that's not, that electricity use isn't coming from gas system, it's coming from the liquid fuel system, right? And so that pie is getting bigger, and the electricity piece is growing for that reason as well. And so a lot of what I'm doing right now is really taking a look at that pariah half of the pie, which is that gas system, and looking, well, what can we do with that? Are there economic pathways, techno-economic pathways that make sense to continue to utilize that gas system that we already own? It's highly resilient. It's got a lot of inherent storage in it. And it doesn't have to distribute fossil fuels. It can distribute other things. And in fact, today we're only about 2% biomethane actually flowing. But under contract right now, by 2026, 10% of the current supply will be moved to biomethane. That isn't the only pathway that I'm looking at, and the company's looking at. Hydrogen, of course, is another pathway. The obvious one that everybody talks about is electrolytic hydrogen. The problem with that is it requires green electricity, of course, and green electricity now we know is there's not going to be any more Site Cs built in this province. That's my personal opinion. So we'll be looking at we'll be looking at other ways of bringing in electricity. But are we going to be able to use those green electrons for anything other than final energy use? Are we really going to be able to devote it to electrolytic hydrogen, except maybe for storage purposes? I'm not sure. So we're looking at other ways too. One of the things that I'm particularly focused on right now is pyrolytic hydrogen. Been working with UBC and UVic and SFU on various pathways for that. And the pyrolytic hydrogen, as most people in this room probably already know, is just cracking methane into hydrogen and solid carbon. And so no carbon dioxide is produced. And so that holds great promise, in my view, for producing low carbon intensity hydrogen without having to use green electricity. And so I think I'll just leave it there. I don't want to take up any more time, but I did want to throw out some maybe contrarian ideas about the clean growth pathway. I'm not saying that the path forward is not entirely clear to me. I'm not saying that the solution is clear, but these are things, as we look at transitioning our energy supply and the costs associated with that, we can't afford to be pushing technology solutions off the table.
Thank you very much for all those stimulating presentations. Maybe we'll start off with a couple of questions here, and then we will open it up to the audience. I think the one question I might pose to the panel to start with, we've talked a lot about ocean power, potentially the use of wave power. Certainly offshore wind is really becoming very large globally. The problem is connecting that into some type of grid network. However, should we be thinking about that differently? So for sure, for being able to supply remote communities with electricity that are in close proximity, that makes a lot of sense. But what about the potential to make that an export industry, for example? So if we use that electricity that we generate off the grid, if we use that electricity, if there's enough of it, for example, I would use hydrogen as an example. There's a huge demand that's starting to develop for hydrogen as a commodity in the world. That's why Germany came to Canada. That's the real reason why Germany came to Canada. The reason Germany is going to Africa with other European countries to try to establish supply lines for hydrogen is it's not a huge opportunity for Canada to develop an export industry around commodity hydrogen that could make use of these remote areas where we have excellent renewable power. So I pose that to the panel to start with, and we could start with you, Mark, if you want to comment on that, and then just go through each of the panel members.
Yeah, I just finished saying, that, we can't really afford to turn precious green electricity into hydrogen, but that's probably the exception, is when it's otherwise isolated or difficult to bring into the transmission grid. And so hydrogen as an energy carrier, or maybe converting it into ammonia, is a potential export pathway and a way of bringing that electricity into the market, whether it's in British Columbia or elsewhere. Yep.
Thank you.
Yes, I would like to add that using hydrogen, it's very tricky. It can be very dangerous, and we have identified some clear usages for heavy and light duty vehicles, and that seems to be clear. But for example, it won't be for heating homes. It won't be for a limited number of industrial sectors. So I think that we are not there yet on how are we going to use hydrogen, except for the transport of heavy duty and light duty vehicles.
What about when we look globally? Hydrogen is starting to be used in a lot of industries, whether it's the ammonia production to replace the Haber-Bosch process, whether it's actually in petroleum refining. We're seeing a lot more of that starting to be used.
Yes, so, at the end is, I don't want to say this, but we all prize free market, no? We all think that free market is the solution to everything. But, realistically and in practical, free markets doesn't exist. We give subsidies to so many things, and so is distorted. So the problem is that some of our oils are very expensive just to extract and to refine. And actually, the refining takes place elsewhere than in Canada. 90% of our oil is sent to US and then is sent back. Recently, I heard somebody saying to me, in the world, people will be ready to pay $2 more per gallon or for whatever because this is ethical oil. And my answer was, when I go and fill up the tank of, I have a hybrid car, but I still have to put some gas. I don't see from where it comes, this petroleum. I don't see. It comes as a octane fuel. So
I didn't actually mean that the use of, I was just using that as an example of industry using hydrogen. But I agree totally with your point there, right? We're not necessarily going to go down that.
I hope so, no, yeah.
Thank you. Brad, did you want to comment on
Sure.
the other?
Yeah, I might seize on the word remote. Again, being a bit myopic, the group I work with, we focus on remote communities. Remote is in the eyes of the beholder, I suppose. Like for the Mwachimutchila, Yukwat's actually referred to as the center of the universe. It's literally, it's the center of the universe. It's the hub of resources. It's center of trade, as I mentioned before. So it's interesting how our electricity grid becomes a bit of a map of tendril-like pointers to populated areas. And what's not on the grid is remote. And I think what you're referring to is an evolution of the grid. And the grid need not be electrical lines. The grid could be some kind of conduit where we transport energy and some other commodity between generation source and use. And it does open up avenues for energy to be, again, a mechanism of resurgence, not just for domestic consumption. And I'm picking on everything Senator Galvez said. I was really listening. about economic levers or demand. So remote communities, the indigenous communities up and down Vancouver Island aren't doing these projects for demand. There is no demand. There's 0 kilowatt hours of demand at UQuad. It's all about change. And I think that if we can ride the back of that change as a broader society, and that sounds exploitative, and maybe it is, but it's what we need to fix things by 2030, I think, then yeah, if your question is, could we see dramatic transformation of the grid in coastal areas? Yes. And there's already talk about different nations around the north coast and west of Vancouver Island coming together. I mean, I think if you're from BC, you're aware that there's a new call for power. This is all the rage since last week. There's another $140 million to supplement the budgets of Indigenous clean energy projects. We could see, you know, marine resources get access collaboratively and see grids interconnect what were remote areas into more unified economies. Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. And maybe another question I would ask the panel is, you know, we've made these very strong commitments towards being totally electric in terms of transportation. I think at the federal government, correct me if I'm wrong, Senator, but I think at the federal government it's 2035, right? BC has made that commitment. You know, if we look today where we're at with electric vehicles, let's say BC, which has been, I mean, one of the fastest provinces to uptake, maybe in North America actually. If you actually look at the number of lightweight duty vehicles that are electric vehicles, it's only like 1%. So the question then is, what are we going to do to try to make goals that are set in that time frame to try to get to 100% EV use? The other issue that overlay on that is the supply of lithium and critical minerals. The Mineral Intelligence says that by 2050 we will only have 50% of what our requirement is. So to me, I'm just speaking from my personal bias, I would say that's a very big opportunity for hydrogen electric vehicles to complement battery EVs. Could the panel comment on that? Maybe if we, yes, thank you.
I would like to start by saying that I think it will be a mistake to think that the solution is to replace every single fossil fuel vehicle for an electrical vehicle. You know, that's not the solution. Mm-hmm. The solution is public transportation. I have seen pictures of many cities in Canada with tramways, very in the 60s, in the 50s, where there used to be a lot more of snow. And so I know it comes to the political thing because every politician wants to announce a big project, a big bridge. I come from Quebec. I live in Quebec. So right now is the tunnel. It's the second, you know, and it's a big. But the public, there was a referendum and the public was clear. They don't want another bridge for cars. They want another bridge for public or good transportation. Yeah. So I think that's an important difference to make.
Thank you for that. Brad?
Yeah, well, FCIC was born in the late 80s, and it was actually born as a collaboration between UVic and Ballard Power. And the Institute was born around fuel cell technology for commuter vehicles. That was 3.5 decades ago. So in the Institute that I'm a part of, yes, people believe in that idea, that that's technically possible, and that's an avenue, and definitely in terms of resource shortages that you're pointing to in terms of batteries, if we are to electrify transportation, yes, we need a mix. The other part of it, and again, admitting that I'm the coastal person, so I'm attached to the Vancouver Island coastline, to go even farther than public transit, I'm a chair of a department. I have a really hard time getting everybody to come back to the office. So the students have to be there, the faculty find ways to work from home, and COVID really changed, I think, our expectations and beliefs on how we work. And taking, you know, the digital world and delivering it to these locations around the world is one way to avoid people traveling great distances every day to do this. And in fact, that's happening on Vancouver Island. There's a project called Connected Coast, if you haven't heard of it, high bandwidth fiber optic cable going up and down the island, tying into all these tiny little communities to allow them to participate in a digital economy. So I do believe in electrification of transportation, but also agree that there's other measures that you know, bring the pie of transport down in size.
Yeah, no, these are very good points. Mark, did you want to chime
Yeah, I could talk about this for another half an hour, which I'm sure that I'm sure everybody would enjoy. But first of all, I'd like to second Senator Galvez's point about you know, we're so attached to the single electric vehicle, to small light duty electric, or to vehicles generally, that that's a huge problem. Like, an electric vehicle only solves some of the issues of that we're looking at here. Nevertheless, it's super important. 18% of vehicle sales of light duty vehicle sales in this province last year were electric. It's impressive. I know it's only 1% of the total, and we're continuing to build out infrastructure as fast as possible to support that. One of the really, really important things for electric utilities like us is to get that load off peak as much as possible, and ensure that we're not burdening the electric system at peak times any more than we need to. It's going to be under heavy demand in any case. So I think everybody knows that. Looking like medium duty vehicles are probably going to go electric now. I thought they were going to go hydrogen before, but we are seeing from rail and heavy duty transportation is looking more and more likely hydrogen, which is really just another form of electricity. That's enough on that. That's, yeah, it's
Actually,
it's incredibly important to decarbonize
Are
transport.
we running out of time, I guess?
he's up.
But no, I mean, if there is another question or so,
Yeah, it was maybe
we
the
are
audience.
running, and then we'll
Yeah.
we'll give people some time to go and so take a little bit of a break before the
Sure.
reception.
So if there are any questions from the audience, yes, please.
I just want to say something about the thermochemical methods. Very extensive analysis being carried out to do the hydrogens, CBS and so forth. The most sensitive portion from economics actually two things. One is the feedstocks, the other one is the electricity. And you know, you already know, I think that over here in Canada, biomass is very, very strong feedstock. The prices goes up already.
It's getting very competitive.
I'm not talking about biomass anymore, they go back to the coal. But we have a way to sequester CO2. And so you're talking about eventually methane pyrolysis, for example, is one of the good examples. But there are some issues with the carbon, you know, captures, eliminations, and
Right.
that's a separate issue. So eventually you go back and to look at the way and all include the CCUS. And I think that one of the techniques, and they're talking about hydrogen, right? The hydrogen can be stored, and we just talked about ammonia, can be forming acid, very safe way to do so.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to, you know, to mention chemical leading technology is the one platform and can do hydrogen generations and syngas chemical ACE04. Hydrogen is very important for chemical synthesis
Right.
by itself, and also for, you know, for the reduction, for example, iron ore.
Yeah.
Reduced to iron, that's is hydrogen.
Yeah.
And so I think I'm just alerting you, there will be press release about the commercialization in the steel making using chemical looping route.
Yeah.
And in 2 years, you'll see commercial plan of the platform. So watch this chemical looping technology.
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot of interesting approaches that are coming down the pipeline in steel making, that's for sure. Any other questions? Yes, please, Gal.
I would like just to add to those comments in defense of hydrogen. We are involved in significant projects with cement plants where they would like to use hydrogen. We have a process called thermochemical cycles where we take waste heat and add an agent, copper chlorine, and release hydrogen with no emission whatsoever, and oxygen. Cement plants want that because they want to use the oxygen as an oxy-fuel to reduce their coal consumption by about 26%. And we're working with them in Bowmanville, in Ontario. Hydrogen is not the answer to all the questions, but hydrogen, if we dig that barrel very carefully, is going to be a major contributor to our green technology. I just wanted to step
Thank
in.
you.
But I would like to add one more thing. Cracking natural gas is not going to take us to hydrogen. For every kilogram of hydrogen that produced by cracking
pyrolysis. Yeah.
Do we have time for one more? There was one. Sure. I think there was one more question that I missed. Yeah, sorry, so.
So, I have been in many conferences talking about energy, etc. It seems that the focus has been always on the supply side, not on the demand side. What we can do on the demand side. The most effective way of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, the most cost effective, has been on eco-efficiency to reduce waste heat and actually utilize that. And that's not sexy, people don't want to talk about it, but that is what it is working. Also our behavior as consumers, we gotta change it if we are serious about climate change. There was a study or survey was done by the University of Ottawa recently asking people in Canada what do they think in terms of climate change and how many they agree. I think by majority they said they agree. The second question was how much are you willing to pay? And the answer was $100. You can't manage this big challenge with $100. Okay, so we've got to change our behavior, find ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you for that. I think that may be it, so. Thank you, Adam.
And with that, we take a pause. I did just want to mention, just on a small logistics issue, we have been extremely fortunate with the turnout to today's sessions and also to this evening's dinner, to the point that we have completely sold out of meals. So just in case there was anybody who happened to be thinking of bringing extra people along who are not registered, it's going to cause difficulty, right? So just to say, if you do have any complicating arrangements, please let Christine and Chris know, and we will try and deal with those. So in the meantime, thank you everybody for sticking through the sessions and participating. I'm sure there's still a lot of questions to discuss through the reception and dinner. Thank you.